What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the Magic stories as they're posted on Wizards' website, but with this recent drought in Vorthos content or Magic stories that Wizards has been putting out, we decided that instead of going back and doing things like the Magic Story podcast or whatever, we were going to do this. And this is what we are calling JaAR Throwback. So we'll call it episode 1, but who knows? We may ditch the episode numbering scheme, but this is JaAR Throwback. And this is where we're going to go back and look at other stories that have been posted on Wizards' website from the past.
Old stories.
Yes, and this was a combination of our ideas. I thought that it would be a cool idea to go back and look at old stuff, and Amy correctly was like, well, we're going back to Ravnica soon, so are there old Ravnica stories? So we were able to find some. You can tell from the title down below, but we are going to be reviewing The Shadows of Prahv, parts 1 and 2, because, as we will talk about later, they were pretty short individually. And so we were able to do both, and we encourage you to, as always, well, actually, sorry, that's part of the quick review at the beginning, right? My quick review at the beginning is this is actually a really good one to read, especially before going back to, for Guilds of Ravnica to start. Mm-hmm. It's totally worth your time. It's super quick, but also it's
fun.
Yes, it's definitely fun. It's, I mean, you know, it takes you...
They are fun.
Yes, both of them.
2 parts.
Yes. And there's, I mean, you know, there's a surprise appearance from a character who we're probably going to be seeing quite a bit from in the Guilds of Ravnica stories. And by surprise, I mean, I did not know that she was in these. Maybe you're like, yeah, Joe, that was the whole point of these stories. And that's fine. And in fact, these stories introduced a spoiler card, right? It was over 2 weeks. And at the end of the first story, or during the first story, they were like, this is part 1. Part 2 will be next week, and there will be a preview card for what was at that time Return to Ravnica. Because, spoilers, these were from 2012, from when we read these stories.
Yikes.
Which is great. And I'm sorry, that was very rude of me. The Shadows of Prahv parts 1 and 2 were both by Jenna Helland. I apologize for not properly citing that. So, my quick review at the top, like I said, definitely you should go read them. And maybe you're like, Joe, this is not a new story. I can't just, go and I'm not just going to go searching for them. And you probably could Google it and find it. But regardless, we've helped you out. Check the description below. I will link at least part 2 for you. Because with me linking part 2, the first line at the top of part 2 says to find part 1, click here. And so you'll be able to read part 1 and part 2 just from that link. So click that link down in the description if you want to go read the story first. Because it is an older one, we always say we review, we don't summarize. We're going to mention points here and there, but just so that you know that we're not purposefully leaving things out, go read it for yourself. Like I said, not that long, and definitely worth your time if you want to learn more about Vraska.
Yeah.
Because not only that, but I have to say...
I do.
Exactly. But I also have to say, this story seemingly, at least part 2, seemingly previewed the Vraska Planeswalker card for Ravnica, for Return to Ravnica. That's crazy. When does that ever happen? Seriously, I mean, again, it was back in...
I guess it
right,
did.
it was back in 2012, so, and they were returning to Ravnica, but they let the spoiler for one of the 2 main Planeswalkers in the set, maybe 3, it's been a while, but they let one of those be previewed in a story? That's a pretty big
awesome.
deal. That's a pretty big deal. So, on to the story itself. We have some, what I would consider to be kind of innocuous and unimportant characters in the grand scheme. In other words, I don't think we're seeing any of these people besides Vraska in Guilds of Ravnica coming up, mainly because some of them don't make it through. But otherwise, we meet right at the top of part 1 Branko, who is an Azorius guard in an Azorius prison filled with Golgari prisoners. Because the order went out to capture a bunch of Golgari, and so there are a bunch of Golgari prisoners. I'm sorry, did I cut you off? You were agreeing with me on the quick review at the top, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure
I
I
was
didn't...
like, you're not cutting me off.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we got that settled before we moved on. Sorry, everyone. So yeah, there were a bunch of Golgari prisoners. There was a raid done by the Azorius, and seemingly the Azorius and the Boros were kind of working together on this one. And we got to see, like I said, Branko, as well as Gebris, who was like a younger guy and a little bit more kind of impetuous because he like kind of flies off the handle and starts like beating on them and kicking them and stuff, the prisoners. And the prisoners, Branko knows that they're outnumbered. He says in his mind that there are too few of them for too many of the prisoners that, as he pointed out, just kind of got shunted to the basement because of the size of the raid. There were just too many of them. So they all got shunted to the basement. There were a couple of guards put there to watch over them. And Branko mentions a Gorgon. A Gorgon just kind of hidden in the corner among everybody, and he notices, and he says something that Amy pointed out as well, but points out the fact that even though she's like emaciated and stuck in a dungeon, she still is regal looking while just laying there.
And has a blindfold on.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, and eventually...
And of course she's regal looking. She's Vraska.
and they don't tell you that at first. I mean, we knew it because then the scuffle begins. Vraska gets her blindfold removed and she gets set loose on Branko, but Branko's a little bit more experienced, and so with his eyes closed, kind of pummels the crap out of her, and like she's like bleeding like crazy, and that's seemingly, from the way that these stories describe it, that becomes the moment of Vraska's first planeswalk. And she planeswalks away for the first time, but not before ripping Branko's ear off.
Yeah.
That we find that, I mean, they mention the ripping and that he's like in pain and his ear is hanging down near his neck. But then in the second story, we get that kind of callback where they're like, oh yeah, Branko the One-Eared did that thing that one time. And it's like, that's amazing.
Loved it.
That he's just called Branko the One-Eared now. And kind of going back to stories back then versus stories now, I feel like a lot of this way of storytelling I preferred to what they do nowadays. But
Yeah.
one thing that I will shout out that they've started doing more recently that is good is putting that line in there for a change in
Yes.
perspective, because they did a change in perspective following a picture that was put in the story. But it was like the third or fourth picture in the story,
Right.
and there were gaps for each of those pictures, and yet there were not perspective gap or
Right.
perspective switches in those gaps. And so there was no indication whatsoever until you started reading that next section where you were like, oh, now we're talking about some guy named Relov, and he's sitting in in an office and at a desk, and but we were in a prison a moment ago. So like the transfer there was a little jarring, no pun intended.
Well, I mean, in a long form story, it makes sense to do it like that.
Mm-hmm.
But in short stories, I think it really does help the reader understand the material better to have some sort of an indication, whether it be a line or something else.
Yeah,
some sort of an indication that the perspective is changing or the time frame is different or whatever.
And I've even seen like just you paragraph down a bit and just leave the 3 asterisks in the middle, just something to indicate, that change in perspective, that change in the voice that we are now hearing from. And then we get to Relov. And honestly, that part in the beginning, we find out later was kind of more of a demonstrative flashback, essentially, to then give you context for the ending that Relov meets. Because we meet Relov like halfway to 3/4 of the way through the first story. And then by the end of part 2, we see Relov's end, because because that's the end of the story. But to understand the motive behind wanting him dead, you need to have had that context from that first, like I said, flashback section, where we get to see Vraska, we see her planeswalk, although we don't know that it's her. And it does an amazing job then of building up to her card being spoiled at the end of part 2. Because honestly, if we want to get meta here and stop reviewing the story for a second and talk about the reality of this, that should be the point of these stories, is to draw in readers to your stories because they care about, for example, a preview card maybe at the end. Both of these stories were blatantly leading to, hey, guess what, Vraska?
Right.
And you get to learn a little bit about her backstory, you get to learn a little bit about her motivations, you get to see her kick a little bit of ass, which, to be completely honest, Vraska was...
She always does.
Well, Vraska was the villain in Return to Ravnica, at least she was supposed to be. But to be fair, we read about Relov in these stories. I even wrote here in my notes, not a good guy. Not at all. And I wrote, the examples that they give you, he's got a stack of paperwork in front of him, and he picks out off this one, off the pile, and it's a tenant of like a slumlord. And they're complaining about the conditions and about the slumlord, and the guy, Relov says to himself, man, I know about this guy, he's a terrible slumlord, but you know what? There was a typo or a, bad spelling or bad grammar or whatever in this person's document, and so maybe this will teach him to spell better next time. And he puts it at the bottom of the pile. And it's like, you know that it's a problem. You just acknowledged to yourself that you know that this is a problem, but because he spelled one word wrong or said it in a way that you didn't like, you're just shunting it to the bottom of the pile.
I will point out that there was a typo in this story.
Mm-hmm.
For real.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, it was not a good story,
Mm-hmm.
and we shouldn't be reviewing it.
Yeah, sorry,
I'm gonna
guys.
Get up and walk away.
No, that's fine. That was Amy's short review from the beginning that I cut her off from talking about. And another example was he was talking about signing paperwork to detain people or keep people arrested for a riot or something that there was no proof that they specifically were a part of, but he just kind of rubber stamped it and passed it along.
Right.
And yet mentioned that he loved all this legal jargon and then said, that he enjoyed it as long as it was done correctly or well. And it's like, well, clearly this wasn't done to your exacting standards because you didn't accept that one that was definitely necessary to have accepted, but you accepted the one that, there was no proof behind it, but I guess it was written well enough. And so...
It's just, a superiority complex.
Bureaucracy, man. Where they can look at it and be like, oh, well, there's a typo. Guess I don't have to look at the merits of this one. Toss it aside, because you didn't follow the rules. You didn't follow the exacting standards. And to be fair, from what we know of the Azorius, that tracks. That seems pretty legit for Azorius. It's like, do you have this paperwork in order? If not, sorry, can't help you. Even if you deserve to be helped and you need to be helped. Sorry, too bad.
Or if you need help filling out said paperwork.
Right. And
because maybe you're not great at spelling.
Mm-hmm. And we find out from Relov that he used to be a good guy. He used to be somebody who cared. He had, we meet, or we hear about his friend Javi, whom he gets a letter from, somebody that he had started an initiative with to rescue, I want to get this right, rescue kids from the Gruul and put them in Azorius or Boros academies. So you're taking them out of a bad situation and putting them in a good one where they'll be able to learn and grow, hopefully.
I disagree.
Well, you like the Gruul because you are Gruul colors.
Yes.
If you guys are new here, and actually that's really funny. If you guys are new here, Amy is Gruul. Amy is a red-green personality, and I am an Azorius white-blue personality. I didn't even realize that when we were reading this. That's really funny. So yeah, we're taking kids from that horrible, horrible place and putting them in the right place. The Azorians.
Can't we all just get along?
No, I'm pretty sure that's kind of the whole point of the next set that we're moving towards.
Well, we're not there yet, are we?
No, we're not. So, but this story, you hear about Javi and you see the letter that she sends, and that's kind of how the first story ends, is with Relov getting this letter from Javi, and now into the second story, Relov and Javi go together, they meet up, and they're going to go check out this crime scene. And the crime scene is of Arbiter Zavan, who we heard, once again, not a great guy. He was filibustering, but he was filibustering something that I didn't write down that is something that you would probably... it was refugees.
Yes.
That there were refugees who wanted to come in and be saved, and he basically filibustered the refugees coming in. And I don't mean to talk down to anybody, but just in case there are any of you who don't know what filibustering is, it's basically where you step up in a political setting and you talk. And you talk and you talk and you talk about anything at all because you are the one that rightfully has the floor. And you talk so much... Wow, I didn't even notice that you were doing...
Because you were talking too much.
And you talk so much that
you just waste a bunch of time.
To make sure that whatever referendum or discussion that is supposed to be happening doesn't actually get to happen. And they talked about that he did that. And so then he was found dead with words carved into his body. Words like law and judge and proof. And that those words carved into his body were bleeding or had bled, and then it caused him to die. And we find out from Javi that someone's been going around killing arbiters. And these arbiters have been being killed in the same manner in which they lived. So you had this guy who used his words by filibustering. He used his words in life, and he used those words in death, because those words were what killed him, because he bled out from all of those words being carved into him. You then had someone who liked being the center of attention, being kind of strung up in the town square, basically. And that's how he died. And then you get to Relov. And Relov is there with Javi, and Javi is kind of explaining this, and Javi gets into Relov's place, and they're discussing all of these happenings, all these goings-on, and you find out that Javi has learned things, and she's got, and Relov questions her. He's like, oh, are you learning this from your guildmaster, meaning Aurelia, because that's the Boros guildmaster, Jevi being a Boros, if I did not mention that earlier. And so Relov says, did you learn this from your guildmaster? Because Javi mentions her, she taught this to me. And then Javi says, I have a new master now, a new person who's telling me these things, and she says that all of you need to die because he was one of the arbiters that signed an order for something to happen that was not good, and she questioned him on it. She called him on it, and he was like, I don't know, I sign hundreds of those a day, I don't pay any attention. And she calls him on it and says, you used to be a good guy, you used to be part of this initiative like the Gruul one that I mentioned earlier. And
yeah.
But it was
Gruul initiative.
I was going to say it was taking things away from the Gruul though, because you guys are bad. You guys? No?
Nope.
Okay. And and she calls him on it and says, you're not doing the right thing. What if you saved all those people? What if now you're signing these orders to just have them all captured again or killed or put away or whatever? You're not even paying any attention to that. And he kind of brushes it off, And then, as if it's not his problem. And then Javi talks about where she learned this ideal, these ideals from. And it's from Vraska. And Vraska shows up. There's a slump in the hallway. And Javi says, oh yeah, that's your door, man. Your door's going to open in a second and somebody's going to come in. And somebody comes in and Javi goes, you might not want to look at her though. And so he closes his eyes as Vraska grabs him and picks him up and throws him to the ground. And Javi says, you should be grateful. All those other arbiters that she had me kill, she didn't show up for. For you, she did. So you should be grateful. This is, it's quite an honor.
Right.
And then...
I mean, it is.
And then Vraska, holding him in the air, says, what should we do with him? What is a just death for Relov? And Javi says, inaction. Because he doesn't care about his actions. He doesn't do anything proactive any longer to help the less fortunate like he used to. And Vraska says, perfect. And she grabs his eyelids, lifts them open, looks at him, and the next paragraph you hear, or you read, is about a new statue being installed on the grounds. And it's supposed to be of a different arbiter, and the guys are like, it doesn't exactly look like that arbiter, but whatever. The quality of it is so good. It looks so realistic, guys. And nobody notices that it is, in fact, Relov, who is now being installed as a statue on the grounds. And that's where our story ends.
Yeah.
But like I said, as Vraska is revealed as Javi's teacher, or new teacher, that's where we get the preview card. And it's right at the end of the second story where, sure, you could wait until the second story comes out because you read in the first one, there's going to be a preview card. So you could wait until that second story comes out, click on the link, scroll to the bottom, take that screen capture, post it on Twitter, whatever. Or you could read both stories and truly be wowed by what you got to experience. Because it was so good. It was very cool.
Did they have Twitter in 2012? I guess they did, right?
I mean, YouTube was 06, so I have to imagine that Twitter was around by 2012.
Even the comments.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, you could probably Google it. When did Twitter begin? Regardless...
Well, we can't right now. We're
right.
doing a video.
Oh, sorry.
God.
Is that what we're doing?
No. I'm not. I don't know about you.
So, overall, what did you think?
I thought it was great.
Right?
Yeah.
This was really good, guys. Seriously, if you, I know we talked about a lot of it and probably spoiled a bunch of it if you didn't go read the stories, but seriously, if you have the time, they're not long.
Yeah, they're really short.
They're really
super
not.
short, super fun, action-packed.
Yeah. If there was a third one,
interesting.
we probably logistically could have done 3. Like if there were 3 parts, we could have logistically done 3 because they were so short, but so good. It really was, and I hate to be like, oh, it was better in the past, because everybody hates when you do that. So I'm not gonna do that. I am gonna say there were benefits and there were not benefits, right? The benefits being this, to me, and I've been saying this for years, you want people more interested in the stories, do this. Do exactly this. Now, to be completely fair, the stories these days seem a lot more constrained with needing to get to certain plot points because they need to further the story. These 2 weeks were devoted to basically a story barely introducing you to Vraska.
Right.
And you got to do it with heaps of flavor. I mean, don't get me wrong. Heaps of flavor, but it really was just to be like, by the way, there's this planeswalker named Vraska.
Right.
Which is
awesome.
Great. It's so good. I feel like they're a little bit handcuffed these days. And this is my assessment only. Maybe if you agree, let me know. If you disagree, let me know. But this is my assessment, that I think that they're a little bit handcuffed these days in terms of needing to hit those story beats.
Yes.
And needing to do it within a set time frame so that they're not too early before the spoilers or whatever, but they're not too late so that they're bleeding into the next set as well. I don't know. That's my takeaway from this, is that this is what was the past, and I really think that spoiling cards in this way is so much better than just not spoiling any cards in the stories whatsoever, which I feel like it's been more recently, right? Back when we were doing like Shadows over Innistrad and things like that, I feel like there were preview cards in the stories, and they don't have to be the preeminent, villain planeswalker in the set. I'm not asking for that. You could do a couple of uncommons, right? You could do a rare, a legendary creature or something like that. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. This one was, but it was done so well. So if you want to see how to do that well, go read these 2 stories.
Yeah.
Just go read them. Obviously, spoilers, like we mentioned already. Vraska's at the end. But go into it.
But they're awesome.
Right. Go into it and enjoy that. Enjoy that aspect of it. And come back, honestly, if you believe it, come back and tell me that I'm wrong and tell me why.
Yeah.
Because
I always want to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't know, man. It seemed so good. It seemed like they did such a good job. And I say they, I mean, Jenna wrote them, but, whichever team she was working with, good old 6 years ago. Because this was, to be more specific, I don't know if I mentioned this, Part 1 released on August 29th of 2012, and Part 2 released September 5th of 2012. So almost exactly 6 years ago. Because right now we're in mid-September, pushing to the latter end of September. So, 6 years since the last Ravnica set, and now we're going back to Ravnica again. So, this was this week. Please let us know what you thought of this JaAR throwback, this Throwback Thursday, whatever you want to call it. This was a way for us to get out some Vorthos content to all of you that is still relevant to the things that are coming up. In fact, I'll be completely honest, I told Amy this earlier, Amy, like I said, had suggested, hey, let's do Ravnica stories. And I was like, that works, let me go find some. And I went all the way to the end, all the way to the oldest posts or articles in the Magic story. And I found a couple of like individual card article stories or whatever that I skipped, and then I found the Ravnica ones. And these I jumped in on. And there will be more. We'll be back next week with more, especially if you like these. If there are a ton more and you guys really like them, we'll try to see if we can coordinate them along with the Guilds of Ravnica story releases. But to be completely honest, it'll probably be, if the gap between the sets is going to be so large from now on, we'll probably sprinkle these in and try to cover all of those bases for the future to try and, do as many of these as we can, basically. So, like we said, let us know what you thought in the comments down below. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And let us know if you're excited for Guilds of Ravnica. Yeah. I know that at the day that this video goes up, yesterday, the pre-release will have happened, which I am a huge fan of. If you follow us on Twitter, I tweet about that mercilessly because I just want to do it all the time. It's a great show. It's always put on super well. I've enjoyed literally every one of them. So sure, I'll do the shameless plug because I really want this. If you would like to see me on a pre-release, please let those people know. Do not badger them. But let them know that you think Joe's pretty cool and you'd like to see him on a pre-release. That would make my day, and I would love you all very much for it. If you don't do that,
That's your day?
Well, I mean,
Then it's not worth it.
It would make my week, my month, my set. It would probably be my favorite set of all time because I get to be on the pre-release for it.
Nice.
Anyway, but if you don't do that, I still love you because you watched this video and you're still staying here listening to my filibuster, as Amy so lovingly put it to all of us.
Yep.
I haven't denied it once. So thank you guys so much for watching this episode of JaAR Throwback here on Geek for All. Let us know what you thought in the comments down below. Let us know if you want to keep seeing more of these, if you hated this, if you loved this. Did you go and read the story because of us? Do you just remember it from 6 years ago? Which, props, if you did. But yeah, all of that would be examples of you joining us in showing off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
Throwback hashtag Vorthos Pride. So, yeah, thank you guys so much once again. Feel free to click some of these other videos that may be popping up on the screen. Subscribing by clicking that button. It helps us out quite a bit. This has been another episode of JaAR, as I said, although the first episode of JaAR Throwback. Here on Geek for All, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.